Now, my first guest is somebody who has studied defence and defence matters and defence politics for many, many years. I think Coughlin, defence editor of the Daily Telegraph, we could call you a veteran.
I've been around a bit, yeah.
In this area. First things first, NATO itself. Obviously, this expansion of NATO is happening. The Turkish objections have been dropped, so we're going to see Finland and Sweden joining. When it comes to fair shares and people paying their way, there's been some increase from what I can see in European defence spending, but two-thirds of the NATO members are not spending the 2% on defence, and we still seem to be relying, ultimately, perhaps I'm wrong, but it seems to me, that we're relying on the Americans to bail us out if we get into trouble.
Well, it's a very good point, and one of the outcomes of the NATO summit in Madrid is that we are going to increase, NATO is going to increase the number of combat-ready troops in Europe to protect it against Russia from 40,000 to 300,000. Mm-hmm. So, ergo, the question is, how many of those 300,000 troops will be Europeans and how many will be Americans? And, of course, the lion's share, as has been the case since the Cold War, will be Americans. And it is slightly an indictment of the Europeans that the threat Russia poses is to European security in the main. And it's the Americans, again, who are being called on to do the lion's share of the protection. Yeah,
and Germany, I mean, their position on all of this, bizarre, they keep on...
Well, they're getting better, Nigel. They're getting better. They've finally given up their pacifism, which is really, in some senses, I think a lot of people in Britain quite like the idea of a pacifist Germany. But Germany is right in the front line of what Russia's up to. The Germans have facilitated the rise of Putin and his military killing machine.
Well, they're still funding it.
And they're still funding it. But they have now committed to their 2%. You mentioned Trump and NATO earlier. And the big punch-up between Chancellor Angela Merkel and Trump was over her point-blank refusal to meet the 2% commitment.
And they were spending about 1.1 at the time, I think.
Yeah. And Trump was quite right in that. And it's not just Trump. I mean, Trump made a lot of noise about it, but this goes back to the Bush administration. Even the Obama administration were getting fed up with the Europeans rising on their coattails. So the Germans now are committed to their 2%, but it's going to take an age to get them. Yeah. I mean, the German army is basically training with broomsticks. So to get them as a proper... and, I've seen the Germans in action in Afghanistan, and they are not a very impressive force. I mean, I think 10% of the German deployment to Afghanistan actually left the barracks. They just stayed in the barracks in case someone got shot.
What about us? What about us? We've got the Prime Minister, and as I say, standing relatively tall at that NATO summit. There's no question about that. But we're still looking to hack back the army.
Well, we're in a very difficult position, actually, now.
Ben Wallace has spoken out in a way that I find extraordinary for a Defence Secretary. General Sir Patrick Sanders, the new boss of the armed forces in this country, there seems to be a bit of a battle going on in Whitehall.
There is, and I think it's quite interesting that General Sanders has been in the post about 10 days, and he's already sort of declared war on the Prime Minister.
He means business.
With the backing of the Defence Secretary. And I got into terrible trouble with Ben Wallace, because at the time they appointed the head of the armed forces, back last year, I said that Sanders was Ben Wallace's preferred candidate and not the head of the Navy. The head of the Navy got it, and Ben Wallace went mad at me. So fast forward, funny how politics works, and you find Wallace and Sanders completely in cahoots, taking on Downing Street over the size of the army. Now, Boris Johnson, as you say, has conducted himself well on the Ukraine front. He did well at G7. There was a sort of united communique of not giving in to Putin and not doing back deals. And the same is true with NATO. But as I come back to my 300,000 troops and what Lord Dannis has said, what can we contribute to those 300,000 troops? It has been an anchor of our military policy for 2 decades that we will be able to deploy and sustain a division of 10,000 men.
Yeah.
We do about half of that today.
Yeah. And of course, there was Now, I know the inflation figures weren't foreseen by this government, not by the Bank of England either, but you know, there was a manifesto commitment, wasn't there, to increase defence spending by 0.5% per annum more than inflation.
Well, yeah.
Well, OK, we know that's out of the window. But, I mean, where are we? You know, because NATO itself projects that our spending on defence in percentage terms will go down over the next few years.
Well, see, I'm not an accountant, and my view, my personal view, is it's not, I mean, clearly we want defence properly funded. The issue today is what we spend the money on. Now, I do not see the point of cutting the army to its lowest level since before the Napoleonic Wars, at a time when everybody agrees in NATO that we need troops on the front line. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. And the problem is there is this ideological commitment in Downing Street to invest in cyber technology and space technology and give up on the grunts on the ground. But as General Patrick said in his speech, his first speech yesterday, you can't cross a river with a cyber attack. You need to have soldiers. You need to have heavy armour. So this is a reality of the war we are fighting today. And I think we need to get real. And I personally think the argument about defence spending is a sideshow. What we really need to focus on is what kit we need, how many people we need, what we need to arm them with, and how they're going to defeat Russia.
Or any other threat that we could face at any point in the future.
Well, there are many. We could have another conversation.
Could be China.
Or it could be Iran, or it could be somebody completely unknown at the moment.
Absolutely. Con Coughlin, thank you very much indeed for coming in, joining us. Come back and see us again soon. People care about this subject. It was amazing. Philip Hammond, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, once said, "There are no votes in defence." I know for many of you sitting at home and listening to this on the radio how wrong Philip Hammond was, because defence and the state of our armed forces matters enormously to many, many millions of people in this country.